Lands, Wednesday, May 27th, 2020. Call a meeting to order, and the first item will be the approval of the agenda. Late items, Steph, anything?
Nope.
Okay, thank you. Anybody have anything they want to add to this agenda? If not, we will just approve it by consensus and move on to the adoption of the minutes. Anybody see anything in the minutes of March 12th, which is interesting, that just before the stuff hit the wall here. Anybody have anything, any errors, omissions you see in there?
No.
No.
Somebody move approval.
So moved.
So moved.
Thank you, Tom. And I'll second it, and I'll ask all in favor. Me.
Aye.
Yeah, aye. Okay. Are you okay with that, Steph? Are you getting a read? I had a girl. Would you rather have us on the hands up part or not? Steph?
I think it's a small group, so we can see.
Okay.
Yeah.
As long as you can handle it, I might be going back and forth to you just to make sure
Sure.
everybody's
Yeah.
covered. Okay. Thank you
Okay.
very much. So that's was unanimous, obviously. We're going to move right down to public comments. I don't see anybody from the public on board here. And unfortunately, we're going to move on to action items here. And I was just checking those out, and 4.1. And I am very remiss on the action items. So the action items, you want to go through them, Steph, or I can? The Mayor's Standing Committee on Community Lands of the March 12th meeting. Communicate decision regarding proposal to Dion White of New Commons Development. We're still playing telephone tag. I guess at that point in time, the COVID thing hadn't really hit, and didn't quite understand the intensity, but it's on my to-do list. I think he's obviously got the message, but I will communicate with him. And the number 2 was I was supposed to contact the Children's Center and the skate park group and ask them for letters of intent to obtain information regarding the request in writing. That one totally went over my head, but it's reinstated, and I'll get onto that this week and see, because there's another item tonight that sort of reinforces that. So I'll get onto that. And future actions, it says all, when needs assessment of community lands is complete, which we have. No, we don't have the needs assessment. The MSCCL need to discuss what action should be taken from the results and create a vision statement. So that's in the not too distant future, hopefully. And we'll get that done. So we're going to move on to 5.1, which is
Maureen's
a
got
council.
something, Gary.
Sorry.
Maureen?
Yeah, Maureen, go ahead. Sorry.
We just got clarification on what's meant by the needs assessment for the community lands. Are we specifically talking about sewer and water capacity?
Correct.
Or is there,
Correct.
okay, so
Yes.
it's servicing assessment.
Servicing, infrastructure and servicing. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I'll add that.
Okay.
Thank you, Maureen. And okay, so the next one we'll move on is 5, which is council referral. 5.1. Daniel Martin, who is not here today, Manager of Planning and Development, Re Bowen Island Housing Needs Report. Now, I think that's going to Maureen.
Yeah.
Are you going to start us out on that?
Yeah, I won't
Okay.
speak for very long, and I'll ask Dave to add to what I have to say.
Okay, fine.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So what you have in your agenda is a report from Urbanics, who was hired to do the first housing needs assessment for Bowen Island since the late 2000s. I think the last one was done in 2008. This was identified as a strategic priority in our 2019 island plan. It's also a provincial government requirement now that every 5 years we produce a housing needs assessment for our community, and we submit it to the province. And as a result, the province gets a picture of housing needs in the broader context. And it's also a way of tracking, monitoring accomplishments during those periods. So Bowen was among the first of the communities to complete their housing needs assessment, in part because we had been monitoring faithfully and were poised to submit our application for funding, essentially the day that the program opened. So this has been presented to council, and it's been discussed in draft form in the housing committee, and then it was also referred to the housing committee subsequent to council reviewing it. So the demographics that are presented in the report don't really come as much of a surprise to those of us who have been tracking. They're based on census data, so the currency is through 2016. As a community, we're getting older. We still have that bimodal shape that is typical of rural communities. We're richer, we're more educated than many other similar communities. So that part of the report really wasn't much of a surprise. Some of the projections around the makeup of the housing stock, as we all know, we've got 90% plus single detached homes, and the renting proportion of our population is going down. Many of the renters are locals. They work on island, often in the service sector. What was new was that some of the comments from the from Urbanics. The principal researcher said that she'd never seen a community that demonstrated such extreme unaffordability.
Unaffordability.
I don't know why, but I keep losing you. Like the sound.
Yeah, you froze. Anything you can do there, Steph? Or is it just a bad connection on her end?
Unaffordability.
There you go.
Sorry, yeah.
We lost you there for a second.
Okay, so the researcher said she'd never seen such extreme unaffordability. And if you take a look at it's page 39, maybe take a note for later. There's a chart that shows different types of housing, how much you would need to make in order to afford that. And then it's sort of elaborated out. And it's one of those shockers where it's a great big X across all of the categories. So what that did is it sort of underscores that on Bowen Island, it's difficult to get in, which we knew, and it's also difficult to transition because we've got these big houses that often are older houses, and they need some upkeep, and you can't really downsize, and you can't get in. And that relates to another observation that's made in the report, which is that our population isn't actually really growing all that fast. It is growing, but not that fast. But what we have is churn. We have really significant mobility in this community where people are priced out of the market, or they are in a situation where they can't find an alternative to that 4-bedroom single family home. What else do I have to say here? The piece in the report that gave me some hope, just in terms of some of the work that we've done in the last couple of years, is on page 23 of the report. And it shows new dwellings by permit issued. And I don't know, Steph, are you able to pull that up fairly easily? It's on page 23 of the agenda package. Because I just want to draw folks' attention to that in particular, because it's a wedge.
Okay, just a sec.
Just see if there's anything else I thought I should mention. So I wanted to keep this short so you guys could comment. Just the last thing is just to show, second to last thing is to show this this chart. The other point that they look at in the report is core housing need. 12% of the owners in the province, in Bowen, 12% of owners are in core housing need, down at the bottom of the page. And 23% of the renters are in core housing need, which means they're paying more than.
Steph, you'll have to go a few more pages. That's page 9. It's not
Oh,
actually.
sorry. Why is
It's
this-
different numbering on that.
Yeah,
Oh, okay, sorry.
the pagination's
you.
just off
Oh,
of
thank
it.
you, thank you. Okay. Oops. No, sorry.
It's okay.
It's page 37 on
In the
mine.
report? Okay, thanks.
Okay.
On the
thank
report,
you.
it is 23, but on this document, because there's extra pages at the front.
Got it.
There it is.
Okay, that's
There
it.
it is.
That's it.
Yeah.
You just pull it down a wee bit. Okay, so if you look at this, it covers, what's the period that's covered, Steph? I can't see the top of the chart.
There we go.
Period.
Okay, so 2011 to 2019.
Mhm.
So what you see in this chart is you see in 2014, that great big jump when Belterra was built.
Oh,
That's the co-housing project. And I mean, you can see the impact that it has on the housing stock here. And then in 2016, the last council started looking seriously at enabling other types of housing stock. And we introduced the secondary suite bylaw. Things started to shift a little bit more. And then by the time you get to 2019, you've still got, you know, the bulk of what's being built being single family, single detached dwellings, but there's more diversity in what is being built there. And obviously don't know what 2020 is going to look like. But this particular chart was in the entire report what gave me a sense of hope, you know, that the picture is changing and that all of that vision statement stuff at the front of our official community plan about being a welcoming community for diverse ages, diverse stages of life, and so on, that diversity might actually find homes here. So that's just a bit of an introduction, and I welcome other comments on the report.
okay. Thank you, Maureen. I think I'm going to go to David for his comments, and then I'd just like to go through the sort of the by board member and just see what the really salient points you took from this were. But let's start with David, and then we can see if we can put something together to send to council. David?
From the perspective of this committee, it's sort of, okay, we're looking at the community land. So Steph, if you could go to page 54 of the report, please.
Yeah.
Go down a heck of a lot. And that has the housing action plan that comes out
Yeah.
of it. And I'll just speak to it a little bit. We all know that we need rental housing. And the report makes that dead clear that so many of the workers, people who work on the island can't afford to live here. They need rental housing, and there's very, very little. And we know we need to address affordable housing. We need housing that is affordable in some either subsidized or a lower market. But the point that they make is there's other areas as well. They talk about the growth in 65 plus. So there we go, housing action plan, and just scroll up a tiny bit. It's got 5 little, go up a tiny bit. I think if I'm on the right page. Go up a tiny bit. It's got the 50, so no, down to 54. Sorry, I might not find it. Here we go. Yeah. I'm not seeing housing action plan. Yeah, maybe scroll a tiny bit. It had 5 points, like 5 bullets.
A little lower.
There it is.
There we go. So so address, and the ones that are important when we think of our community lands, obviously we need to deal with rental housing. We need that, and we've got some projects that could be underway. I've got Birch dealing with the affordable side, but we also need to address the market housing, and we need to address housing for those folks who are age 65 years and over, who have a big, as Maureen was saying, got a big home somewhere or other on the island, and probably need something a little smaller so they don't have to go up on the roof so often. So to me, when you get a chance, just have a look at from this section down to the end. It sort of scrolls through each of these 5 areas and talks about some strategies in those areas. So I think that would be, we don't need to go through them right now, but it's a good place to spend a little bit of time, I think.
Yeah.
So those
Okay.
are what I wanted to point out, Gary.
Okay, thank you, David. We'll go to Tom. And what are your comments, Tom?
Yeah, there's a lot of good information in here, obviously, but I think that I guess some of the takeaways I had when I was reading through it was just some conclusions that that were in here that I was just maybe wanting to question a little bit. And you know, the history of Bowen Island has been built on single family housing. There's obviously no question about that, but you know, the way that has come about maybe needs a little bit more focus, because Bowen went through these years that Maureen highlighted. If you look back, you know, some of the trends where significant amounts of single family housing were created. They were created at a time where there was land that was available to subdivide. And, you know, Kate's Hill, all of the subdivision activity around the golf course, things like that, that really are what drove the single family housing market, was because of that availability of developable land for single family housing and the zoning permitting the form of housing that occurred there. And also in the face of a political climate where there was very little, if any, appetite for secondary dwellings and for densification. This was really a trend that was clearly identified in the community plan. It was really a single family community that was the vision on so many levels. So I think it's important to think about that in terms of some of the information that's been applied here. And I think I agree with Maureen. I think the trend that's healthy here is the adaptation of more creative forms of housing than just single family, and how that I would look forward to seeing growing in the coming years, because it fills the gaps that are identified in the 5 points that were on the build out, where, for example, those that are 65 and older and are looking to come out of their large houses where they raised their families, there is really just a poor selection of alternatives and forms in the form of housing that would fill that gap. And that's not just smaller single family, but multifamily has just never been part of the mosaic on Bowen Island. And I think that's the biggest change that I think is going to help accommodate some of those needs. The other thing I think that the report misses is that, you know, the reason there's a lot of younger, I would call them, people coming over to Bowen and, you know, sort of breaking through the affordability aspect is that they're often selling houses in the Lower Mainland, and they're coming over to Bowen with equity in their pockets, and they don't fit into that affordability model, even though their salaries may not be, you know, maybe reckoned with on the tables in terms of affordability. That's not what made Bowen affordable to them. It was the fact that they drew equity out of another house that they had in a different location and were able to apply that to their housing needs over here. So I just, that point was not well covered, I felt, in the report.
All right, thanks, Tom. And over to Fritz. What did you pull out of this, Fritz?
Well, as you know, with Maureen, I'm also on the Housing Advisory Committee, and I was supposed to have a subcommittee meeting today with Danielle and Robin. Of course, that was canceled, but I did prepare for that. So what I actually thought was an interesting, first of all, I really like the report. I think it's really helpful in advancing the objectives from the council and all that. But what I actually did, I took section 9.1 and I basically just copied exactly what the recommendations are. And then I started to fill in things that maybe would be suitable for discussion. But of course, that is prepared for the Housing Advisory Committee. So
Yeah, that's right.
I don't know how much of that you want to hear, but but I found it under each objective. It's a bit what David was saying. If you take those recommendations that are in purple, I believe, in 1, and you just go one by one, and then you try to figure out, oh, what do you think we can do? I think everybody can come up with 1 or 2 ideas, and all together, it's probably a whole list. You know, for
Put it
this.
up.
Sorry.
You want me to share the screen? What page you're looking at?
Sorry, what?
Would you like me to put that page up?
Then I have to email this to you, but this is really for the housing, you know, I have
Oh.
to right here that I'm reading from that I prepared for the Housing Advisory Committee, subcommittee. So then I thought, well, okay, but I think what comes up later is this whole thing about the sewage, and what Maureen just showed, which I thought was interesting, is that there was one development that was sky high in providing different forms of housing, and that's Belcara, right? And then I noticed how Belcara was realized, you know, notwithstanding the lack of sewers, it's there, right? And I think there's something there that we shouldn't forget, but I think that is probably will come up in this meeting anyway, when we talk about infrastructure and sewage. So I have a whole list here, but I don't think it's the right thing to go through at this moment.
Well, yeah, if I can add to that, I took away from the report two very significant factors. And one of them was the affordability on Bowen. And that's a very scary part of it. And their recommendations to go to like tiny houses, and it's going to involve a lot of different, it's going to involve changing some of the bylaws or zoning bylaws and that sort of thing, so that we can build affordable housing. And, you know, we got to look at some pre-built houses and that sort of thing, pre-manufactured houses. And I think that's the only way we're going to get to where we need to go, because it's quite obvious that the single family homes that we currently, that model is not going to work. And there's absolutely essential that we get some affordable housing on the island. There's no question about that. But the problem is that it's quite clear that you can't build affordable housing on the island with the present structure we have. The other thing that was kind of shocking was the per capita income, which I knew was high on the island anyway, but it's quite a bit higher than Vancouver, Metro Van, and the province. Generally speaking, it's quite a bit higher than the province, which fits into what's happening on the island, is that people are building single family homes, and we're not getting the stock that we need to support the workers on the island. And I think if we don't do something, you know, AKA Whistler, like they had to build housing for their workers, and whether it be for the lifties or whatever. And, you know, this is what I think we seriously have to look at, is changing the way we do business. Now, as far as I'm just looking at the priorities and that sort of thing on these different items at the end. And I think the sort of executive summary about where we want to go, does anybody have a problem with that? I mean, I think council should be very cognizant of this, which I think they are. But I think that they actually we could recommend that they move on some of these points. There's no question about it. Some of them are very good. A lot of them we're going in that direction, but obviously not quick enough. And I think this is a really good background, and we've been waiting for this report, but I think it's really good background for the Standing Committee on Community Lands here, because I think it gives us really good direction about what is needed, not only now, but in the future. And the interesting part is all the seniors that are going to be perhaps downgrading their residence and that sort of thing, and getting into smaller, maybe condos and that sort of thing. But if they're going to be doing that, and they're selling their homes on Bowen and wanting to downsize, you know, maybe there's an area there that we could put in some market housing for the older people that are downsizing, and at cost, obviously, to help pay for the other strategies. So it's a very significant report, and between us and obviously the Housing Advisory Committee, I can't wait to see their report. But from our perspective, I think we should definitely support the recommendations in here. And does anybody have a problem that and I mean, we could drill down on that. I think that would be a pretty intense procedure at this point in time. But everything in there, in my mind, has some significance. And you know, does anybody have comments on the recommendations, whether they think that there's anything in there that, you know, isn't appropriate or, you know, needs some more discussion?
Oh,
Oh,
Gary,
there's Dennis. Hi, Dennis.
yeah,
Oh, good.
I apologize. I don't have the report, and I didn't yet receive the invitation for this meeting, but I haven't seen
Okay.
anything since the response about availability. So I apologize for being
Oh, I'm
unprepared, but
sorry to hear
I
that,
did
Dennis.
want to make a few comments.
Yeah,
And I agree with Tom about the great over 65 market. I think that's a strong one. And yours, Gary, your comment, Gary, about getting into pre-manufactured homes and could be fairly small homes, especially for
yeah,
single, elderly, and young people. But certainly it can hit the affordability. But one of the things I'm really concerned about, and that is that I think we should be looking at getting more density, which will also help affordability, but also in conjunction with saving and preserving open space and trails and that sort of thing that we've been talking about with the sort of creating the natural environment and the connectivity of places that sort of shrink lots and surround them with open space and trails sort of approach. I think we need to really be thinking about how we do development and how we do get density and maintain Bowen's character.
So does that,
absolutely. That's a great point. Maureen, go ahead.
does that mean, Dennis, that you want to ensure that conservation development principles are?
That's exactly it. Conservation development.
Yeah, because I
Yeah.
don't think that figures at all in this report. It's not on their radar.
Well, I think that needs to be on all of our radars now that all the easy stuff is probably pretty much developed, and we're looking for sophisticated types of units for a wider population. And I think this can help accommodate that without destroying Bowen's character.
Yeah,
I think
I
there's a
agree.
really good point there, Dennis. And I think the other thing, you know, I think that in some ways a lot of the opportunities for conservation developments have been missed through previous development styles where, you know, the typical subdivisions that happen, even though in many cases they're large lots that have a green look and feel about them, but in fact there's little or no densification that has ever been considered as part of the makeup of that subdivision. And to go back into those is what may be necessary to look at whether there's opportunities to somehow create some infill and also maximizing green in areas that have already been developed. And that could be a difficult proposition because there's just not that much available to play with. And I guess that's what I see is that, you know, on Bowen, we've gone through quite a development cycle over here for quite a number of years. And what's left that has the potential for densification in terms of private land is pretty small. And I think that's probably why these community lands are going to become, you know, a really important part of this discussion.
Yeah,
That's a good point, Tom, that, you know, we don't have that much land, and well, the municipality doesn't have that much land. So we have to be very conscious of how we develop the private property outside the cove. But I think to your point on the conservation development, I think that's pretty well entrenched now in the Bowen Island Municipal, in the building department and in council's mind, that is the way that we are going to proceed in the future. There's no question anything that comes in front of council now, the conservation development is very high on the list. I think densification obviously is the only way out of this this situation. We do have to densify, and the unfortunate thing is, we'll see later on in the meeting tonight, is that our infrastructure at the time may be a little bit marginal. So, you know, we might be getting stuck between a rock and a hard place, or get very creative about how we service the densification. And that's, you know, obviously going to be a very important part of this, and more important. I mean, anyway, it's going to be an interesting meeting here, because there's some stuff coming on a little bit later that kind of starts putting all this in context.
Gary, just a couple of points.
Yes, David.
One about conservation development. Am I on? Yeah.
Yep.
Conservation development. We had that, the APC worked on it. We had a policy proposal developed. It went to a whole array of committees. It's now back with Daniel and I guess me to turn it into something that could come back to council. So it's not yet done, but it's in council's mind, because we've actually brought it up in instances, even though we don't have a policy there.
Yeah, the intent is definitely there.
Yeah. The other
Maureen?
thing,
Oh, sorry, David, go ahead.
I just wanted to one other thing. On page 57, there's some copy that talks about what we were just talking about, taking existing lots and densifying them. And it mentions, you know, the potential, I'm reading now, this has the potential to create pocket neighborhood. The type of planned community consists of a grouping of smaller residences, often around a courtyard or common garden and so on, designed to promote a close-knit sense of community and neighborliness. Fritz actually did some work on a big property on Bowen, which he showed me a month ago, a few weeks ago, which actually does exactly that. And it might be interesting for Fritz to show that to us all later. It's taking a big property and then turning it into something really quite interesting. But it fits in with one of the recommendations that they have here.
If I can maybe say something about that.
Could I go first? May I go first? I've been waiting.
Yeah, sorry, Maureen. Yes, you're in.
The 2 points. One is that we have our housing needs assessment, but we do not have a housing policy that's being adopted by council. I mean, we have our affordable housing policy that talks about, you know, the 15% of the square footage being dedicated, et cetera, but we don't have a housing policy that actually puts some of these things into a context, like a Bowen context around, you know, this should come first, you know, so it's prioritizing and has some sense of what's feasible. So this is a report, an external report. They come up with their best ideas. The referrals to committees are getting, you know, further feedback. But we actually need to go through this systematically, led by staff, I think, and supported by committees, and then it needs to come back to council before we say yes. Because if we say yes, we've said yes before to a bunch of other stuff over the years that hasn't really gone anywhere, because it hasn't gone through the filter of, is this actually doable? And what are some of the you know, to use the approach that we use with climate action, you know, what are some of the quick wins? What are some of the medium terms? What are some of the long-term possibilities here? So I think that feedback would be really useful to come from this committee. We need a housing policy. That is our next step. And the second point that I wanted to make, David has brought it up in a bit already, the notion of pocket neighborhoods. The housing committee has talked about that on a number of occasions. And when it comes up either in committee or outside of committee, it's always butt up against the notion of the densification of the cove. You know, if the OCP says that our priority should be the densification of the cove, and we start talking about the densification of other areas of the island, are they at odds? And I think it actually is time to revisit that notion of whether densification should only be taking place in the Cove, given the stresses on the infrastructure that we have there. And given the fact that if you densify elsewhere on the island, there's space for sewer systems. There are wells, there are joint wells that can be put in place. So if we're looking to enable housing, this is beyond the purview of community lands, but if we're looking to enable housing of different types, that housing may not fit on the community lands given the current infrastructure challenges, but it might very well fit on a 10-acre, a 20-acre chunk of land elsewhere on island where you have a willing private property owner who wants to go in that direction.
I agree 100% with you, Maureen. And I think, you know, we can always have the Cove as the center of the island, but I think we have to ease up on this. All the densification has to go in the density transfer, and all the densification has to go into the Cove. That would be my feeling personally, but you know, that'll be a council decision how they roll with that.
Okay.
Fritz, go ahead. Did you have your name up there?
Well, what Maureen was saying, I think is just absolutely excellent. I think that is absolutely wrong with the OCP. It is fantastic that Maureen said that. And maybe take a step back. There's one thing I noticed about the way kind of, you know, seniors, right? This kind of seen as a separate group, but I think it's not really right. I think it's better to have one form of housing that is multi-generational, and it actually is suitable for everybody. And that's the strength in it, that it can actually change. And what I showed to David Hawking actually shows that, which we, I think, can probably run through the Housing Advisory Committee, this from a conceptual point of view. But you know, I kind of also think that the small home development, you kind of have to watch that a bit in certain areas that may be suitable. But again, the housing needs report actually says very clearly that the only way to provide more affordable housing is in multi-level, like they say 4 to 6 stories.
Yeah.
Because it's the only way you can get the cost down. And it's probably true, but in some areas, like more rural areas, and you know, Maureen, what you may like is that actually in preparation for the Housing Advisory Committee, you know, you remember that a fairly long time ago, we tried to figure out how you can kind of infill gently densification with, you know, secondary suites, and how the size of the lot makes a difference. So that also applies to, you know, pocket neighborhoods. And I actually have something ready to show, but again, that is probably better for the Housing Advisory Committee. And it shows exactly, it puts it in perspective. I can just wave it to you, okay, for a second. And you can I do that or not?
Sure you
Go
can.
for it.
Yeah, why not?
You can do it more complicated with screen sharing, but I don't think that's really the idea. But the only thing I wanted to show is that you can probably see this on a 5-acre lot. You see there?
Yeah.
I have to go like this, I guess, right? You
No, we can see it.
Little pocket development on a 5-acre lot. This is what you're allowed to build in it now, right?
Yeah.
The blue thing is 1,200 square feet secondary suite. The light gray is the maximum footprint of the house, and the blue box is the total FSR for space allowed.
Yeah.
And here, that's the little pocket neighborhood on 5, and it is a bit big on 5. But then the next picture shows it on 10 acres. Now suddenly it's much smaller, and the next one shows it on 20 acres, right? So what it does, it gives you that feeling of, oh, you can actually keep the rural character of the neighbor of the outside the Cove, where everything is supposed to be rural, and you can actually bring little pocket neighborhoods in that. And what it actually does in the long run, I believe, is that it protects that land, because of the decision made that it cannot just be subdivided and subdivided. You know what I mean? So I think
It does more than that, though, Fritz. I mean, it clearly provides alternate forms of housing, which Bowen Island is desperately missing right now.
Yeah.
And I think this is the kind of trend that gets to that.
Well, you know, we were talking about along Miller Road there and the densification that we were recommending for that. That's all been put on hold now. And that's a discussion we'll have in a little while. But so that's the problem we're facing is we were going to recommend that going forward, and but now it's on hold. So I agree with what everybody's saying, and I don't know if we want to put that into a resolution, or you just want to kind of make it look like we agree with the findings, obviously, of the housing report and the recommendations, and the way forward to this is we really have to start thinking out of the box and open ourselves up to some different, because the system we have now on Bowen, as far as the land use policy, is probably going to need some adjustment, I would think. So I don't know if we want to go there, but we definitely need some more flexibility in how we go forward. If we're going to achieve these housing incentives, we definitely have to change the way we do business. There's no question about that. But that's another story. I just the recommendation came from council that they were looking for some feedback on the housing report, and I think that's what we can give them. The housing advisor also is going to have a report. I think we're all on the same wavelength here at the committee, which is really nice to hear. And we can certainly make some recommendations going forward at a later date. Is anybody prepared to make some kind of a resolution? Maureen, have you?
Steph has been trying to get our attention.
Oh, Steph, go ahead.
Yeah, I just have that the committee agrees with most of the recommendations provided in the report. And then I have the 2 bullet points that Maureen just provided. They were very clear, that council directs staff to develop a housing policy informed by the Urbanics report, and that council consider making amendments to the OCP to allow for densification outside of the cove where servicing infrastructure presents a challenge to multifamily housing development.
Yeah, I like both of those.
That's
I know there
absolutely
was a
fundamental.
lot said.
Yeah,
It's absolutely fundamental. I mean, I think that's what we all know, is that the OCP has stood in the way of this type of diversification of housing. There's just no other way to look at it.
Yeah.
Can we, Steph, or Gary, can we add something to the effect of utilizing conservation development in order to provide a variety of housing types?
Yes.
Something to keep some momentum on this, because gosh, this was, how long ago did we come out with the conservation development, and it's still sort of not there quite yet.
Well, it's
Even though
there in
most-
the consciousness, it's just not, it's not there in writing. Yeah, I agree with you, Dennis. And I think if we can put that into the fact that, through conservation development, we can densify and not destroy the environment. I mean, that's obviously a very credible point. If we want to add that in there.
and that works with the notion of the housing densification not only happening in the cove.
Yeah.
I would like to make some point that the recommendations in this housing report are going to be extremely hard to achieve with our current zoning bylaws. But I don't want to push that part of it. That's just something that I think has to be emphasized, that we have to change the way we look at housing on the island. We will not achieve the housing that is recommended in this report unless we start being a little bit more creative with our land use bylaws and zoning. Anybody disagree or agree with that, or?
Well, I agree with it, but do we need to say something about, we need to look at some of the OCP provisions to enable?
Yeah, I don't know if we should be that. Whatever you say, Steph. Sorry?
That's
The
fine.
OCP's already been included in the recommendation.
Oh, okay, I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
No, that's fine. And I think we have to be a little bit more general in our request. I don't think we can, the idea is that there has to be a change. Did you add anything, Steph, to that?
Well, I think that Maureen's got something to say, and I suspect it might be about a land use bylaw review going on.
Perfect.
It actually
ahead, Maureen.
it doesn't. I think Fritz is gonna deal with that through the housing committee. What it has to do with is the idea that we've talked about on various occasions about the perception of openness on the part of municipal government to innovative projects. And so we had talked about maybe issuing an EOI for part of the community lands. And I don't think that makes sense given the servicing at this point. But
No.
actually having, and this has come up in conversation with a couple of developers, conversations I've had, actually sitting down with some of the developers and having a conversation about what their impediments are. And obviously the biggest one is going to be money. It's just super expensive.
Yes.
We can talk until we're blue, and if the money isn't there, stuff isn't going to happen. But maybe there are some ideas that they have that they would be happy to provide in an informal context that could be helpful. So I think, and it doesn't have to be in the recommendation, but I think that there just has to be more conversation with the existing and potential developers about how they would fit into the housing picture on the island.
I think it's important too. Sorry, is that what I noticed by going through the land use bylaw and through the OCP with the Housing Advisory Committee is that it's absolutely full of hurdles to move forward. It's all over the place. And but I think that if the LUB is more accommodating and facilitating, that it simply attracts more private capital. I mean, it's hard to by government resources. And I think there's lots of money around. You just have to make it attractive for people to use that money and do something with it. Because I don't think there's a lack of money on Bowen. There's a lack of opportunity. Like if you actually see how difficult it is to get anything done, then you say, well, yeah, let's review the LUB and the OCP and make sure that they're facilitating to what we actually want to achieve. You know, because there's so much, we have people that wait so long for permits, and it costs so much money to hold land and to make decisions. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah, I think, Fritz, your point is well taken. And I think that comes out in the report. They don't come out as much and just say it. Well, they do, but it's not very strong. But they certainly indicate that we have to change the way we look at housing on the island. And it's the entire picture. It's the OCP, it's the land use bylaw. It's all the restrictions in place. It costs a lot of money. We have to find out a way to do this less expensively, because the unfortunate part is on the island, and everybody that's in the business knows it, by the time you build something on this island, it is not and cannot be affordable housing. You cannot afford to build affordable housing on Bowen Island in the present environment. So I mean, I don't know. That's sort of we have to have some fundamental changes, and I think if we can send that message to council, that we think that's you know, if we want to achieve the outcome from this report, and we want to ever have any affordable housing on this island, we have to change the way we're doing things.
Gary, I'd
Yeah.
like to say a couple of words here. I like the motion. Well, I really found that the whole discussion has been really, really great, really interesting, and I think we need to move in this direction. And I really like the idea, as Maureen suggested, and it's in the motion, that we then send this to staff and work on a housing policy of some sort that addresses all the kinds of things we've been talking about. The tricky part is that we're asking for significant change. And to put that on Daniel's lap, without direction from council that we're looking for significant change, it's impossible for him to do. So I'm a bit stuck as to how to proceed. I don't know. Maureen, do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Well, Maureen had a good point, is talk to the developers and say, what's impeding you here and what's costing you a lot of money?
So
And what's making it not work? Yeah.
I agree with all that, but how do we, if we sort of dump this on Daniel's lap, how do we get that in the process? Because we're talking about something quite a lot bigger than just asking Daniel to come up with a policy that sort of fits with what council's thinking.
Yeah, and I think, David, just from our position here at the the Community Lands Standing Committee, that we will recommend to council, and I think it's how council deals with it when they get it. I mean, we can't make those decisions at this point. We can recommend things and say, there has to be some substantial changes, and then council or staff will take it from there. So, Liam, do you have any comments here? I see your face just popped up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask if there's been much engagement from the Bowen development community in the provincial initiative on development approval review process that's underway. In my previous work, we were conducting a province-wide initiative of looking at the development approval process across the entire province, and because every community is different.
Yeah.
And trying to gain an understanding of where improvements could be made to make it easier for the development community while maintaining the values and priorities of communities. And so I'm just curious to know if Bowen's been engaged at all in that.
I would say no offhand, but anybody else want to
Not that I know.
chirp in there? No, I really don't think so at all.
Liam, is this the review that is looking at potentially eliminating some of the steps as part of the streamlining of the process?
Well, the province would not step in and dictate how development approvals are done, but rather just point at best practices. So, because that's completely a municipal authority, a local government authority. So they're not necessary. They're mostly just trying to get information onto the table and open up the dialogue to help create best practices.
I think I can say with some certainty from the folks I speak with, no, there's been no involvement, and there's probably no awareness.
Right,
No.
right.
It might be useful.
Fritz, would your housing committee be getting into that sort of issue?
Fritz?
I don't know exactly what to say. We have the housing needs report, which I guess is our priority, right?
Yes.
And we realize that there's all kinds of existing legislation, the OCP, the LUB, that is in the way of implementing what the housing needs report actually would like to do and what council would like to do. And but our thought for this meeting, but I actually find interesting, I read this report from Urban Systems about the sewage system, and we have two high esteemed municipal employees in the meeting here. And so, but when I read it, it looks like nothing is going to happen very soon or very quickly with the sewage, the municipal sewage system. And earlier, when Maureen was pointing at that there was one spike in providing more of a variety of somewhat less expensive homes, that was Belterra. And Belterra is using its own septic fields. So then I was thinking, the idea of phased development, that we can actually let some developments go ahead, they use septic field, that septic field can be commissioned one day in the future when the sewer system reaches it. So there would be a plan of how that sewer system actually grows over time, realistically, with all the money that it needs, right? And then identify pieces where it's unlikely that the sewer will be in the next number of years, and then say, okay, you guys can go ahead with the septic field. And Belterra has proven that it works. And if you look at Belterra, if maybe one day they can connect to the sewage system, the municipal sewage system, they'll probably be really pleased because now they can use the septic field for something else. But you can actually plan that. You have some housing, you have some land reserved for a field, you have some more housing, and then one day you can switch over. But what I've been on committees for years back. I was on the APC, and there was the same discussion. And now we're 20 years further or so, and the sewage system is always behind. And now, recently, you know, Gary, that the development along Miller Road is again delayed because of the sewer. I mean, it tells you that the idea of focusing on the cove and actually everything has to happen there, always subject to getting municipal sewage, then in my mind, that this doesn't really make any sense. And that idea, what Maureen was talking about these little pocket neighborhoods that can be spread over, you know, with the conservation development, spread over the island, they actually are not dependent on the cove-based sewerage system. So then I think if we focus on that a bit, then we can actually move forward and in a very respectful way and use it, as Dennis is saying, with the conservation in mind. You protect land as you go, you know, with these developments.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, Fritz, and you're absolutely correct. And there has to be substantial change, and I think this is going to be this housing report, which we've been waiting for a long time, just sort of kickstarted this thing. And I think obviously council is going to have to move in a direction to rectify the situation we're in, because I don't think we can get out of this mess we're in without changing some things. But anyway, so do we have that recommendation? Anybody else have any?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure, I wanted to see what we've captured, Steph, in
Want me to screen share it?
yeah, please.
Okay. There's something about my lifestyle that I get really nervous when I start screen sharing.
I don't want to hear it.
Okay, it's right there. Sorry. The Mayor's Standing Committee on Community Lands agree with most of the recommendations in the Bowen Island Housing Needs Report and provide the following comments. Maureen, you mentioned with the support of committee, so maybe feeling like it's not all in Daniel's lap.
Mhm.
Direct staff to work with committees to develop a housing policy informed by the Urbanics report, perhaps the Housing Advisory Committee.
Mhm.
Like
Yeah.
that wording. Okay. That conservation development principles be used to ensure variety of housing types and protection of the environment.
Yeah.
Yeah, the point that I was thinking about is actually missing here.
Okay.
And that is, you know, so this report has come to our committee for feedback and comments
Yes.
back to council. To me, the most obvious comment that we can make, and it comes straight out of all of the conversation we've just gone through, is that in order to meet the housing needs suggested in this report, there's going to have to be significant changes made to the policies that guide development on Bowen Island.
Okay, so the next two bullets are regarding the official community plan and the land use bylaw.
Yeah, that should be right up at the
Part of
top
what you're
though,
saying.
because that's first
Okay.
and foremost in my mind as
Okay.
Yeah, I agree.
steps necessary in order to get into this report at all. It has to be clear that there's going to have to be changes made in order to be able to make any of these changes that are being suggested.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm wondering, and I hate to add an additional step, but I wonder if the APC shouldn't be included in that response, because they have a little bit broader view than just housing units
That's committees. So.
as committee liaison.
But if we as a committee are being asked to comment on this, I think we should do so.
Yeah, I think we should comment on it. If it's too bad that it didn't go to the APC, Dennis. It probably should have gone to the APC, but that's I don't think that's really our place to recommend it go to the APC. But we won't drop that for sure. Yeah. Steph, did you put anything together for that last
Yes.
comment from Tom?
I just pulled those two bottom bullets up to the top. I don't know how you guys
Okay.
feel about this wording. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Not really, it's pretty small.
Okay, so that council, so the following comments. One, that council consider conducting a review of the land use bylaw and remove elements that inhibit development.
Can I just comment on that?
Yeah.
In Island Plan 2019, under the Advanced Housing Initiatives, one of the points, and this is a point that the Housing Committee has been working on, is to identify barriers to housing diversity in the OCP and LUD and proposed revisions. So this point is actually asking council to consider something that council has already agreed.
It's already moved, yeah.
So it's got to be something like that council directs staff to continue to identify the barriers to housing diversity.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
But the only thing we're not doing here, though, is linking it to the housing needs report.
Right.
Yes, and I would just say for that first bullet, Steph, that last bit about and remove elements that inhibit development. I think again we want to be careful with that because is the committee specifically focusing on housing development and not necessarily all development?
Housing.
Okay, so
Yeah.
Yeah, I would rather see a more positive term that it facilitates. I mean, like inhibit. I didn't like that word so much.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
It should facilitate what the housing needs report is and then I thought the word densification.
Let's finish the first point.
So can, Maureen, if we say identify barriers to
facilitate
Right.
the recommendations of
Yeah, that's the piece I think is missing, Fritz.
Yeah.
Tie that comment back to the report.
Yes.
To facilitate the recommendations contained.
implementation of
Implementation of the recommendations.
Yeah, nice one, Fritz. Recommendations of the Urbanics housing report.
Yeah.
housing needs.
Yeah, that's much better.
And then in the next bullet,
And it's also in the OCP, not just the LUD.
Yeah.
So the next one has those. Okay.
The next one is yours.
Sorry.
but then the word densification, people are scared of that word. If you use it, I would call it gentle densification outside the cove, because that actually is the intent.
That's true. That's what we're trying to do.
On multifamily housing, that should probably say more like is in the housing report, housing needs report always talks more about a variety of housing and smaller units and that type of thing. Not necessarily, because like, you know, what people are scared of is lots of density.
Diverse housing.
Yeah, diverse.
Diverse, yeah.
Yeah.
Housing.
The diverse family housing or whatever.
Yeah.
No, not just family housing.
No, yeah.
Yeah.
The term again that is more appropriate, I find. You know, I think I said earlier that I don't really like that between seniors and the rest of the population, probably because I'm a senior now. But the idea in my mind is that it's for multi-generational and people that need care. These are actually the people that need care. They can be old or young, it doesn't matter. And then there is multi-generational, basically the idea that the use of the units can change over the years. Like, you know, I'll give you an example. I showed that what David Hawking was referring to, that the proposal I did to help some friends. But and I had somebody take a look at it, you probably know her, but and that person responded and say, oh yeah, gee, you say it's so suitable for seniors, but I actually think it's the best for young families. That's what you know, and I thought, well, wow, that's cool. So you can actually design things that are multi-generational, and you don't have to limit it, you know, by grouping people in certain kind of classifications.
Do we disagree with any of the recommendations in housing? I just wonder if we should take most out of there.
Well, because weren't there 2 points that Tom raised that he felt were gaps?
But they don't fall into the recommendation stuff.
Okay.
They were just
Okay.
analyses that in my opinion, overlooked.
Yeah. The verb in the last clause is wrong. Be used to ensure. That's not what's going on.
But maybe something should be in here.
Form?
No. Sorry, maybe something should be written too about the
To assist.
Sorry?
To assist in a variety of housing types, maybe.
Oh, sorry.
But it doesn't,
Oh, okay.
does it?
It's a protection of the environment that goes along with it.
Well, it does because it takes out 75% of the land or whatever, so you have to densify the piece of property that you're working on and not spread it all over the property. I hear what you're saying. It's not quite accurate.
Could it be that conservation development principles be
used? Yeah.
Supported or advanced?
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, that's good.
Support would be.
Yeah, be support.
Still not quite right.
Be supported
To
to advance a variety of housing types and protection of the environment. I don't know.
It's the other way around. It's that the development of a variety of housing types and protection of the environment be based on conservation development
oh
principles.
yeah.
Got it backwards.
Yeah, that's way better.
This is fun. A variety of housing types and protection of the environment be based on.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Conservation development.
Principles.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. Okay.
Good.
What do you think?
Hold on. So third one though, council directs staff to develop a housing policy, or do you want the stipulation about working with committees, or is that obvious? Taking some heat off.
Maybe, I don't know. If council decides to do that, they will say that they will work with the committees. So I don't know if it's really has to be in there.
Yeah.
I would say.
Yeah, I agree. I'd kind of like to know what Daniel thinks, whether the committees in drafting a housing policy would be helpful, or if they should
Yeah.
there
Yeah.
at a later point.
And then they can decide whether they want to go out to the APC and, housing advisory, et cetera,
Good
council.
point.
Everybody generally in favor of those recommendations? Nope.
I am, but I think Maureen mentioned right off the top, I think the first bullet, the council the OCP is considered in the second bullet, but I think it's useful
You want to put in the first one?
in the first as well.
Land use bylaw and OCP?
Yes.
Okay. And then we can take out the second.
The second one is more specific.
Specific about it.
Yeah, I think it's fine.
Yeah, okay. We'll leave it in there then.
It's also possibly the most controversial of
Yeah,
all of the points that we're making here.
that's right.
That's correct. It definitely will be.
How do people feel about, in that bullet, the council consider making amendments to the official community plan to promote gentle densification outside of the code?
Yes,
Allow to promote. Yeah.
I like that. Perfect.
Should there be something, Gary, should there be?
Yes, go
also,
ahead, Fred.
something about the limitations of the SNUCCO or Bowen Island municipal sewage system?
No, that's a separate issue that we'll be dealing with.
Right.
Actually, 'cause-
It's going to become very part of everything anyway. So
Yeah.
I don't think we should put that in here because it might not be as bad as we think it is either. So that's the other issue.
Sorry, Gary, it says less here. So less than what? So less Challenge diverse creation of housing than the Cove. That makes sense. Oops.
No, I don't think so. I think it was fine the way
Very
it was. I don't know. What does everybody else
Okay,
think?
yeah, because it says Cove
Ask
earlier.
Marie.
Right,
Yeah.
Yeah.
okay.
Good.
The 4 points there.
That's good.
Yeah, let's
I think
go.
that's awesome. Everybody in favor of those? Anything we might have missed? I mean, it's not, we can always put it in the next meeting.
Here, I'll unscreen share so that you can see each other voting.
I think that sounds good.
Yeah,
Yeah, I like it too.
I like it.
Okay, I'll move that. If somebody wants to second.
Sure, I'll second it.
Thank you, David. And any further discussion on this area? Okay, I'll ask the question. All in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Yeah. Get them all, Steph?
Yep.
All right. Well
Okay,
done,
happy
everybody.
folks.
Well done. That was a tough one. And I think we've come up with some really good, good policy going forward from this committee. Thank you. And so we're going to go on to new business, other business. That's sort of a catch-all for me. And there's a lot of other business, but I think we can discuss it in the closed council meeting, which is 5.2, moving to a closed meeting. Does anybody have anything else they'd like to chat about quickly? Okay, we're going to move on and we'll move to a closed meeting that the recommendations of the Mayor Standing Committee, Community Lands move to a closed meeting pursuant to section 90-1-K of the Community Charter. Meetings that may or must be closed to the public. And I'll move that. Somebody wants a second?
Sure, I'll second that.
Thank you, David. And all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. We are closing the normal meeting and we're going to move on to the